At the 2012 CKFMS in St. Paul, Minnesota, Gray Cook and Mark Cheng join us to discuss a speed bump in the Turkish Get-Up.
You should have already seen an episode of Unplugged where we did a speed bump in the Turkish Get-Up. Well, there's another one. The first speed bump is some super slow rotations in the half Get-Up, but now there's this difficult thing, the transition from the first half of the Get-Up to the second, where this part of the Get-Up is more about rolling, trunk stability, sort of primal and primitive movements, and all of a sudden we transition and now we become a bipedal moving being. But a high bridge was inserted into the Turkish Get-Up in our first video project where Doc Chang actually did the manual and helped us with a lot of the behind the scenes video production. And a lot of people see this high bridge, think that's the only way to do the Get-Up, and obviously it's not. You're seeing some examples right here. Now, if it's not the only way to do the Get-Up, then why do we ask you to do the Get-Up this way? Well, remember the name of this segment, speed bump. If we put a speed bump into this Get-Up, what does a speed bump do in the parking lot of a shopping facility? It causes you to slow down and pay attention. Paying attention in the Get-Up may give you necessary feedback to really pattern movement better, go mobility and stability. So, Doc, I'm gonna ask you right now, you've got a couple of options for us in the Get-Up, and I think for both a highly functional and corrective Get-Up to give us both feedback and some corrective benefit, that high bridge does something to the hips that no other transition does, right?
Definitely. When you're in the high bridge, not only are you having to demonstrate the dynamic shoulder stability of being able to support your body up off the ground in that position while still keeping the shoulder packed and the neck nice and neutral, but you're also checking if that hip flexor is so dominant that you can't clear that hip, you can't get it in line with your knee and your shoulder. It's what we call an indicator.
Okay, well, the high bridge, so many people obsess on hip flexor stretching, quad stretching, but the high bridge gets us a dynamic tension way to acquisition hip extension. And acquisitioning hip extension is the trigger that makes your glute fire better. So people who are obsessed with glute firing, bridges, muscle activation need to slow down and quit talking about muscles and start talking about patterns that ask muscles to do that. Both hips going into extension to some degree, one with a bent knee, one with a straight knee. Now, there are other options for the Get-Up, and obviously if somebody has an issue or a problem or wants to deal with a little bit heavier weight and they've done all their homework first, you've got some other options, but I think we're safe in saying, if you can do the high bridge, the other options are going to be easy.
Certainly. We've never, ever tried to imply that with the high bridge, that's the only way to do the Turkish Get-Up. In fact, it's just one option. If you want to make the high bridge accessible, or it's something that you aspire to, that's great. But not everyone that comes in to train with you is going to be able to do that off of day one. And it's unfair to assume so. So, one of the options that you've got from the tall sit is the switch. You just switch your legs. Straight leg becomes a bent leg. The bent leg, foot just steps in front. Keeping this in vertical, you shimmy the hand up and then come into the half kneeling. It's one of the more accessible transitions because it doesn't force this shoulder to do a lot of work. If you're dealing with someone that has painful or weaker shoulders, and they can access that tall sit, but they're just not strong enough to come up bridging the hips up high, or even just bridging the hips at all, give them the ability to switch and change the base. You've got that tripod of support here. Once they can shift forward, then they can come on up. The next option is the low sweep. Let's say they can lift up. They've got the dynamic shoulder stability to lift up. They just don't have that hip clear yet.
Okay.
In that case, just keep this base leg or this straight leg on the ground. Drag it back. There's your low sweep. The knee gets as close to the hand as possible, making this base hand easy to take up off the ground. Readjust your feet, and again, that's another point in the Turkish Get-Up. You can reposition your base points as needed in order to create a stable environment. No one said your foot's nailed to the ground there. No one rolled up to you, at least I hope your trainer's not rolling up to you with a nail gun first before you do your Turkish Get-Up. Reposition your feet, come on up. Once you've got that down and it's comfortable, and you've taken or broken some of that artificial tone in the front, try the high bridge, especially if you've built up the glute. Keep the shoulder packed, Keep the neck in neutral. Bring the knee, hip, shoulder, and ideally the head in line. From here, hinge the hip back and proceed. So there, you've got 3 variations. Are there others? Plenty. Originally, when Pavel first taught the Turkish Get-Up, he said, lie down next to the bell, press it out from the floor, get up, keeping your arm locked overhead, and do it in a way that's safe. Plenty of different variations on how you can accomplish that. But here are 3 that will make your job much easier.
I think that was awesome. If you try the variations, sample them on each side. Each may give you some degree of feedback going on the side, but I think you tapped on a very important movement, accessibility. Making the Turkish Get-Up an accessible challenge is an amazing thing. And the one thing that I like about the Get-Up is it is somehow of a movement form. Both in martial arts, in yoga, even in segments of Pilates, we don't just have an exercise, we have a form of movement that requires transition, a tri-planar transition of the body, if you will. And what Doc said is making those adjustments on the fly is part of the exercise. There is that little bit of a variance each time you do it. The one thing about the Get-Up that yoga, Pilates, and some other movement forms don't offer us is the high center of gravity. See, our center of mass is near our sacrum, but the minute Doc places that bell overhead, his center of gravity moves higher in his body, and it causes instantaneous reactions, not just in better shoulder stability, but in the way he uses his feet, his pelvic floor, his core. So the high center of gravity, the benefit of actually grabbing the kettlebell and going through a Get-Up is you get the benefits of some of these other movement forms, but with that high center of gravity, you get this compressive force down through the spine that is actually resisted by some of the muscles we don't think about a lot. We talk about the transverse abdominis, but it's on here. We talk about those paraspinals, but it's on here. We talk about our breathing and our pelvic floor, but watch the way you're breathing here. So you're going through tri-planar movement. It's not a circus trick, it's old, it's ancient, by the way, but you see this and have found benefit in the fighting arts. We've got some pro athletes doing this, and if anything, you said the word, and we used it in the movement book, a sensory-rich environment. When you got this much movement, this many planes, this many body parts, and a higher center of gravity, I think that fits the criteria.
Definitely, and like we said in our last speed bump video clip, don't be afraid to go slow. If you have to jerk your body through a particular plane of motion or range of motion, it might be that you don't feel comfortable with that dynamic stability. Dynamic stability gives you the ability to round the corner without doing the 2-wheel motion. You're able to keep all 4 tires on the ground and still make that corner comfortably. With this, as you're making the bridge, whether you're switching here, be able to move slowly with control. If you're going to do the low sweep, be able to move slowly with control. If you're going to want to do the high bridge, again, from here, move slowly, and then when you transition with control.
Look at this video, rewind it. If you want to tap into this guy's brilliance, he was the brains behind the manual from Kettlebells from the Ground Up, Kalos Stenos. If you want to see him in action, Kettlebells from the Ground Up too. I think you'll be seeing this guy's face around a lot, but thanks, Doc.
Thank you, sir.
For additional instruction on the Turkish Get-Up, check out Kettlebells from the Ground Up and the more advanced Kettlebells from the Ground Up 2, both available for purchase through functionalmovement.com. If you have topics you'd like to see us address in future episodes of FMS Unplugged, please email your ideas to info@functionalmovement.com.